Hey, thank you for joining me again. You probably already saw the first video where I covered scorpions, termites, coyotes, and a lot of wildlife that we have here in Arizona. But we have so many critters that I definitely had to make two videos to cover everything. So some of the critters I'll be talking about today, of course, will be snakes. We all hear about rattlesnakes in Arizona. We're gonna cover owls and toads and lizards and birds and you name it. There is a lot to go over. So let's dive right in. My name's Angela Tauscher. I am broker owner at Rover Realty, and I have a goal to share with everyone the good, the bad, the ugly, especially since having moved here from the Pacific Northwest, I was clueless and I knew nothing about anything and had bought into a lot of perceptions that turns out most of it wasn't true. So the first species we're going to talk about today is the Sonoran toad, or sometimes you'll hear them called the Colorado River toad. Now, I am a huge dog lover. I mean, I named my company Rover Realty, okay? And so the reason I think every pet owner in Arizona, whether you live here or you're moving to Arizona, needs to know about our toads is because they are poisonous to dogs. So I'm really shocked. I talk to homeowners day in and day out that are pet lovers, especially around monsoon season, and I'm always surprised at how many have no idea about our toads here and why it's a concern. Our Sonoran toads tend to only come out around monsoon season. Now, in a prior video, I talked a little bit more about monsoon season, but here in Arizona, most of the year we have pretty dry climate, except monsoon season. During that time frame, because of all the storms, it gets very humid, and for whatever reason, that is the time that these toads will come out. And I mean, you can live in the middle of the desert and not look like there's a single puddle or pond or lake or anything, and lo and behold, come evening, you'll hear that toad ribbit, and there are toads in your yard. It is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And these guys, they're big. They are very large toads. They're not very quick, and your dogs love them. As a matter of fact, small children and kids sometimes love to try and grab them or track them or pick them up, and they really should not. The toads have this milky white substance that covers them, and this is a poison they secrete. So it's very bad to handle them. You definitely don't want to touch them, and you absolutely do not want your dogs touching them. And unfortunately, when the dogs grab them, of course, they're grabbing them with their mouth and trying to shake them around or do whatever they will do to them. And I know this from personal experience, unfortunately. It's very scary when your dog gets a hold of one, because within minutes they start foaming at the mouth. They will start, sometimes they'll start shaking and be delirious and having seizures. Is super scary. You should call your veterinarian right away when this happens. When we first experienced this with our dog, we didn't know what was going on. We just knew that she had gotten a hold of a frog. We didn't think about who we could call. So we just started Googling some stuff right away, and we basically started waterboarding our dog and just flushing her with the hose, her whole face, her mouth. We did that for about 20 minutes, and it was one of the scariest nights for us because she continued to have problems throughout into the night, but thank goodness she made it. But unfortunately, a few weeks later, the same thing happened. So there are a few things that you can do to help minimize or prevent these toads from getting into your yard. I find it's really hard to get rid of them altogether, to be frank with you, but the good news is it's just during typically a season of the year that you have to deal with this. So one of the things that we did that was a huge benefit right away, we noticed less activity, was we had real grass in our yard. The toads are attracted to water sources, real grass, pools, things like that, fountains. And so here in Arizona, it gets so hot, we typically run our water in the morning and in the evening for the grass and the plant. And because they like that grass, what we did is we changed the timing of watering in the evening during monsoon season. So we turned off the water to the grass in the evening when the frogs were coming out, and that greatly reduced the amount of activity that we had in the yard, which was really good for us. And then we finally, after a while, we just stopped letting our dogs out in the evening during monsoon season. So that's something to just factor in and think about if you have pets. Now, in a future video, I'm going to do a video specifically on pets and things that you need to know about your cats and dogs here in Arizona, whether you already live here or you're moving here, that we found out the hard way. So I would love for someone else to not have to suffer some of the things that our pets had to go through just because we didn't know what we didn't know. Next up on the docket is spiders. I'm sure when most most people think about Arizona, immediately the big hairy tarantula is what comes to mind first. That's what it was for me anyway. But ironically enough, I think I've only seen one tarantula in 15 years, and it was when we were out hiking. We just don't see them very often here in the valley. So I'm good with that. Although tarantulas, you know, they do have venom and fangs. They really only attack when threatened, from my understanding. So I think they just look scarier than anything. So we don't really deal with tarantulas very much. What we do see more often than not is black widow spiders. They are very common. They're all over the place. As a matter of fact, I find they tend to make the webs in the same places. So when we're out showing homes, I always point that out to our clients in case they, you know, decide this is the home for them, so that when they get pest control service, they can make sure that the black widows have been taken care of. Because unfortunately, black widows are one of two venomous spiders that we have here for sure in Arizona. We have the black widow, and then we have the brown recluse. Now the black widow is pretty easy to spot. If you've ever seen one before, they're basically all black, and then on their belly, they have this big red spot. So the good news is they're easy to see. The bad news is, from my understanding, their venom is about 15 times stronger than a rattlesnake bite. While I don't believe you would die from a black widow bite, I do think they're extremely painful, not something that you want anybody in your family to experience. And so another great reason to have pest control service when you move to Arizona. In the prior video, I talked about how that pest control service takes care of all the bugs and critters and little things that just attract bad things. Well, black widows, you know, they like ants and flies and just any little creepy crawlies in your yard. And in your house. And so I know for myself, we have our home serviced once a month. It's very nominal, inexpensive. I think we pay $25, $30 a month, something like that. And essentially, again, the name of the game, get rid of the food source. You just want to get rid of that food source of any little spiders, bugs, you name it. You just don't want it in your house, especially crickets, of course, as well. Now, the second venomous spider that I spoke about was the brown recluse. We don't really see them as often. I was kind of surprised to find out that they're here in Arizona. Having personally been bit by a brown recluse when I was in basic training in Missouri, I can tell you it is an awful experience. It just, the bite, it eats away at your flesh, and it takes a really long time to recover. I couldn't even tell you what all they did. I think there was some steroids involved or something. It was years ago, and it left a nasty scar. But just get the pest control service, and I think you can avoid a lot of potential issues with spiders here in Arizona. Okay, I know everybody wants to hear about the snakes. Okay, maybe you don't want to hear about snakes, but I'm going to talk about them. I'm sure Arizona has lots of different kind of snakes, but being a homeowner, a resident here, there's really only two snakes that we typically see and hear about. One, of course, being the rattlesnake. And yes, we do have rattlesnakes. I believe the most common is the western diamondback. So, you know, go figure, our baseball team is called the Diamondbacks. And then the second snake that we actually see here all the time is the king snake. So I'll talk about that in just a moment as well. The first snake, the rattlesnake, I think from my understanding, I've never heard of anybody that's been bit. So it's rather uncommon to get bit by a rattlesnake. However, you can startle one, or your dog can startle one maybe in your yard. There are certain times of year that you want to be more careful about where you're walking, what you're doing. They tend to be more active between March and October. And especially they will come out in the mornings to sun themselves to get warm. So you'll see more activity typically in the mornings and, you know, at dawn, and then in the evening at dusk. They're really, from my understanding, they're not very aggressive unless they feel threatened. And a lot of times, unfortunately, they feel threatened when you come upon them unexpectedly or they're startled. There's a couple things that you can do beyond being very cognizant of where you're walking, what you're doing, but you can rattlesnake proof your yard, which, while it may not be 100%, it is pretty effective. We raised our kids on about 1.25 acres that was surrounded by desert. Now, our personal backyard was block wall. You'll see most of the homes here, a lot of the backyards there, block wall, not fencing. If you make sure to hit the subscribe button, one of my very next videos, I will be talking about the differences with our Arizona homes here than what you might see in other parts of the nation. So with these block walls, what they do is at the bottom of them, they create these openings, or what they call weep holes. And that's because when we get monsoon rains here, we get a lot of water all at one time, and you don't want that water, gathering up against the wall and potentially creating a hazard where it can fall down. So they have these weep holes where the water can flow through the bottom of that block wall and just move on its natural course. Now, unfortunately, while water can flow through, snakes can come in. And so one of the best ways that you can snake proof your yard is to take a wire mesh product, and then you just put that over the weep hole so the water can still go out, but the snakes cannot come in. So the property that we raised our kids on, where we had this personalized backyard space, we had done this on the entire perimeter of that block wall. And I know it worked really well because we were there almost for 10 years. And there was one point in that 10 years where we shared a neighboring wall with someone else that the wall had to come down for a very short period of time, and then we had to rebuild that wall back up. And of the whole almost 10 years that we lived there, the only 2 times we saw rattlesnakes in our yard was when that wall was down. Within days, we had a rattlesnake in the yard. So that gave us a very good idea of how important those preventative measures were that we had put up in the yard, and how well it worked as well. Some pest control companies out there, from my understanding, they have products that you can also spray along the perimeter of the yard that make it less attractive to snakes in general. There are also some things that you can just do yourself at home. Rattlesnakes, they really don't like the smell of garlic, onions, ammonia. So you can take some garlic and onions and chop them up and then put them all along the perimeter of the yard. You can also put down ammonia and or Epsom salt. Just make sure whatever you're doing though is not going to be harmful to whatever pets that you do have, because of course garlic and onion are toxic for dogs. So if you were to do something like this, you need to make sure your dogs don't have access to that, or maybe do it if you possible on the exterior wall. So those are some things to keep in mind. Also, removing things in the yard that would be attractive for the snakes to come in. In Arizona, we have tons of jackrabbits and prairie dogs and little mice, and of course that's just a lovely food source for snakes. So if you can somehow not make your yard attractive to those things by not having out like dog food, cat food, things like that, there's a whole chain of events here that you can minimize some of that snake activity. Now, we do see and hear king snakes all the time. I can't tell you how many times I see a Facebook post, oh my goodness, there's a snake in my yard, I'm so scared, what do I do? And it turns out it's a king snake. King snakes in Arizona are good. You do not want to kill the king snake. And here's why. King snakes eat rattlesnakes. I'll take a king snake all day, every day. I don't like snakes, but if I had to have one in my yard, I want a king snake. So do not harm the king snake. We'll do everything we can to put a photo of the king snake on this video. In general, just be aware of what you have going on in your yard. If you have dogs, you can also do snake training. I just did this recently with my little cinder bear, and it was phenomenal. It was very inexpensive. I think it was $120, something like that. Very cost effective. And what they did is they walked my dog through learning how to recognize and avoid the smell of a rattlesnake, specifically rattlesnakes. And it has to be, the training I guess has to be on real snakes, because it doesn't work the same for a dog if it's not a real snake or if it's a dead rattlesnake. Apparently they are just so sensitive they can tell the difference. So this rattlesnake training, they teach them how to avoid based on the smell of a snake, on the sound, so the rattling of the snake, and then from an actual rattlesnake. Now the rattlesnake had a muzzle over it, so neither the snake nor my dog was harmed, but it was super just eye-opening to see. And that those rattlesnakes, man, they have an amazing ability to strike. Their striking distance is pretty significant. So seeing my dog learn how to avoid that was really important to me, and very comforting to know that if she does come up on a snake in our yard and I'm not with her, that I have given her just one more piece of information, knowledge, learning something to try and avoid that snake, so that I don't lose my dog from being bit by a rattlesnake. So in my new house, I got to see firsthand an owl. Now owls are protected species, so of course you can't do anything to try and remove or get rid of the owl. And I know that sounds really weird that I would say that, but there are people in Arizona that do not like owls. From my understanding, they either have a symbol of great things Or I know we had Native American neighbors that to them, owls were a symbol of death, and they did not want an owl anywhere near their home. So in my new house that we just moved to in Mesa, I was out drinking coffee one morning and happened to look back at my house, and sure enough, there was a ginormous great horned owl, I believe it was, sitting on my roof, just staring at me with its head like swiveling around. I mean, it was giving me the heebie-jeebies. It was the craziest thing ever. So, and he was huge. So we definitely have owls. From my understanding, the most common ones we have here is the great horned owl, which are quite large, and then we have these smaller burrowing owls. Now, again, just like so many other species that I've spoken about, they tend to be out more in dawn and dusk. Owls are hunters, they are night predators, and they will unfortunately take off with a small cat, a small dog. From my understanding, they can carry up to about 5 pounds. You do need to be very cognizant with your small pets if they're indoor, outdoor, where you feel comfortable letting them out. Two other birds that we see pretty often here in Arizona that I just want to talk about briefly. One is the pigeon. The pigeon honestly is a pest for most of us here. We have a lot of pigeons, and if they are gathering, on your home or around your home, that's usually a problem because the pigeon poo is quite toxic. It can actually eat through the roofing materials. So we do not love our pigeons. If you do have solar on the home, it's pretty common to see some solar here in Arizona. Unfortunately, it attracts the pigeons, but I will just tell you, if you have them, we have some measures that you can do to put up to try and get those pigeons to just stay off your home, whether it's we have these spikes to discourage them from landing. Some people will put like bright shiny things that just give off flashes to discourage the pigeons from staying with their home, unfortunately. And then we also have quail. Now the quail are adorable. They tend to be everywhere, and they have these little groupings of their little families as they're just crossing all over the place, and they have this little piece off their forehead that kind of bobbles as they're walking around. They're not usually a pest or a problem. We enjoy the sightings of all our little quail. I will say when they have their eggs laying around the yard, that could attract some of the other critters that we've talked about, but overall, we love seeing our quail. And then finally, I couldn't wrap up our talk about Arizona wildlife without talking about our little lizards and geckos. You will see them running all over the walls. We have something called an Arizona night lizard. We also do have some geckos, which geckos are great because guess what? Geckos eat scorpions, so we like that. But it's sometimes hard because we have so many varieties of lizards to know exactly what that is scurrying up the wall, but they're fun to watch. They're typically not a problem. They go after some of the smaller, pests and bugs and things that are great to eliminate from your yard anyway. Now, while our little lizards, our little geckos are so cute and fun to watch just scurry among the walls, if you do encounter something called a Gila monster, you absolutely want to avoid the Gila monster. They're not very fast, but they are venomous. And so if you find one in your yard, just let them trek on by, do their thing, but do not try to handle them. Their bite is extremely painful. The Gila monsters are more active in the spring, and then of course during the hotter weather, as is kind of the theme that we've been seeing, is during the hot weather. They are typically more seen during dawn and dusk. That's when just about everything wants to come out. Most of us here in Arizona, when it's 115 degrees out, whether it's human or animal, we just want to avoid the heat. And so you're not gonna find a lot of us out and about during the heat. As a realtor, the final part that I have to talk about is our rodent here called the roof rat. Now, these roof rats, unfortunately, they're not all over. They tend to be more of a problem in certain parts of the valley, but if there are roof rats, you need to know about it. And part of that is because the roof rats can create a significant amount of damage to your home. These little critters, they will go up the trees and leap over onto your roof, and they get in through vents and crawl spaces and you name it. It's unreal how they get into the home, but they do. And if they get into your attic, unfortunately, they just start gnawing away on everything. They will gnaw right through wiring and walls and insulation, but unfortunately they have been known to destroy houses, and part of that is because if they gnaw through some electrical components, they can start a fire. And so roof rats are no bueno. We definitely don't want to have those. There's some things that you really can do to proof your house, so to speak, to keep them from getting in. You really, really want to make sure you don't have any cat food, dog food, anything out that would attract the roof rats to your yard. And one of the biggest things that they are attracted to is the citrus tree. We love our citrus trees. There's so many people here that have, you know, grapefruit, lemon, oranges, and then fruit trees as well in their yard. I mean, you cannot live in Arizona and get scurvy. It's just not happening. But with that being said, it's super important to pick up the fruit once it is dropped on the ground, because that will attract roof rats, and you do not want those. Trust me, it's a nightmare to get rid of them once they establish themselves and think that they're your new roommate. So we've covered a lot of critters today. I hope that does not deter you from if you're thinking about moving to Arizona. If you are here already, hopefully I gave you some ideas, suggestions, tips, hints on what you can do to proof your home a little bit better from some of these species. While we love watching them in the wild, we definitely don't want them living in our home. If there are more components about Arizona that you're curious about, you're not sure, be sure to shoot me a question, put a comment. What were you most scared of, or what was a non-issue for you once you moved here that you thought was going to be a big deal? Next video, I will be talking about how our homes are different. As I mentioned before, I came from an area where we have siding and we have shingle roofs, and very few people even have air conditioning. And then I moved to Arizona, and wow, it's a completely different world. So be sure to like, subscribe, comment. I want to hear what you have to say. And this next video, we're going to dive right into how are the homes different in Arizona? What do you need to know about them? How do you turn off the water? Can I drill and put a safe in the ground? Where is the air handler? All these things that you want to know, need to know, whether you live here already or you're thinking about moving here. I want to share that with you.